There comes a moment in your life, and maybe it's right now, when the version of you that existed up to this point simply can't go any further. Not because you're not trying hard enough, not because you lack potential, but because something in the architecture of your identity is flawed. You've been betrayed, rejected, humiliated, maybe even by people you trusted. And no matter how much you try to bounce back, the bounce doesn't come. That's when it starts, not healing strategy. The difference is enormous. Healing seeks comfort. Strategy seeks power. And this is the moment where most people stall. They start rebuilding by reaching for old routines, old faces, old comforts, not realizing they're reaching for the very structures that cracked under pressure. But you're not here for comfort anymore. You're here to rebuild with calculation, like a ruthless strategist, not a wounded soul. Machiavelli never glamorized reinvention. He wrote for the exiled, the dethroned, the broken kings. His message was as clear as it was cold. If you don't rebuild with precision, you'll recreate the same trap that destroyed you. The illusion of safety, the fantasy of approval, the need to be seen, gone. Those are the first things to go. Because if you're weak, now you're prey. And if you rebuild emotionally, you're rebuilding bait. The first law of strategic rebirth: discard your old identity. Not repair it, not decorate it, discard it. Like a snake sheds its skin. You let go of who you were, the version of you who got tolerated instead of respected. The version who stayed quiet to avoid conflict. The one who lowered their standards to feel loved. That version didn't survive the storm, and it wasn't supposed to. A strategist doesn't mourn the death of that identity. They design its successor. This isn't some sentimental self-love arc. It's cold, deliberate removal. And it starts with detachment. You go silent, not because you're hiding, but because you're gathering intelligence. This isn't self-care. It's reconnaissance. You retreat into your own space and you look at the wreckage without flinching. What did they use against you? What patterns kept repeating? What weaknesses weren't obvious until someone exploited them? These aren't diary entries. They're tactical reports. Most people journal their feelings. You document your vulnerabilities like a military analyst. Because if you don't know where you cracked, you'll crack there again, just in a fancier version of your old life. Once detachment is secured, you begin mapping what Machiavelli would call your power zones. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of rebuilding. People think power means being liked or respected. But a strategist defines power by control, by options. What can you say no to without losing your place? Who do you no longer depend on? What can you walk away from that others can't? These questions are not just philosophical, they're tactical. If you can't answer them, you have no leverage. And if you have no leverage, you're rebuilding from fantasy, not strength. Maybe your power zone is your mind, your ability to analyze, to observe, to see patterns others miss. Then stop pretending you need to be charming. Maybe it's your presence, your ability to walk into a room and shift the energy. Then stop wasting time trying to explain yourself. Power doesn't come from being well-rounded. That's a corporate myth. Real power comes from being precise, sharpened, singular. A strategist doesn't try to master everything. They master one weapon and use it ruthlessly. Then comes the severing, and this part isn't poetic, it's brutal. You look at your life like a commander surveying enemy territory. What drains your energy? What delays your momentum? What leaves you confused, weaker, foggy? Those are not neutral elements. They are threats, and they get cut. Not later. Now. It could be a person, a habit, a comfort. Doesn't matter. If it compromises the mission, it's gone. The strategist doesn't ask, does it feel good? They ask, does it serve me? Most people can't do this. They want to rise while keeping the poison within arm's reach. They want loyalty to people who never built with them. They want pleasure without price. But the ruthless strategist sees the cost and pays it without flinching. Then the image rebuild begins. but not for attention, not for applause. You rebuild your image to create one thing: hesitation. When people see you again, they shouldn't know what to expect. They should feel something's changed, even if they can't say what. You don't need to speak louder, you need to move cleaner, slower, with intent. Machiavelli said, "Rulers should appear virtuous, not be virtuous, appear." It's a tactic, not a religion. You use virtue when it benefits your position. You withdraw it when it doesn't. This isn't manipulation, it's maneuvering, and every powerful person in history mastered this. You don't return to the world seeking to be understood. You return to be misread on purpose. Here's where the real difference between a strategist and a survivor becomes obvious. Survivors want to tell their story. Strategists want their results to be the story. Survivors post daily updates. Strategists let silence build tension. You don't owe anyone your blueprint. You let them guess, wonder, spin theories. That's leverage. Let them assume you're harmless until you're already 2 moves ahead. And when someone tries to pull you back into explanation, into defense, into the old rhythm of justification, you don't respond. Because now, every word has a cost. Every conversation is a trade. And no strategist trades clarity for approval. You've already stepped off the stage. Now you're in the war room. Every second counts. You're not rebuilding just to feel whole. You're reconstructing to become unshakable. And this is only the beginning. Now that you've stripped away the noise and drawn the first blueprint of your reinvention, it's time to focus on your strongest tool: information. But not in the way the average person thinks about it. You're no longer a passive consumer. You're now a selective filter. Everything that comes into your orbit must pass one test. Will this sharpen my weapon? Whether it's a book, a conversation, a podcast, a mentor, it all gets funneled through that single filter. No utility, no entry. The strategist doesn't scroll for comfort. They extract for advantage. This is where most people slip back into softness. They confuse stimulation with strategy. But for you, now curiosity is measured in usefulness, not entertainment. And what about your energy? You used to let people tap into it freely, answering texts out of guilt, attending events out of obligation, explaining yourself to people who were never trying to understand. That era is over. From here forward, your energy is a sovereign state. Borders drawn, access restricted. No leaks, no emotional squatters. If someone wants your presence, it costs them not in money, but in alignment, in reciprocity, in loyalty. You're not cruel about it. You don't announce it with some dramatic unfollow spree or loud monologue about cutting people off. You just vanish from their world, quietly, like fog evaporating in the sun. This is what Machiavelli would call psychological distance by design. You don't pull away because you're angry. You pull away because precision requires silence, and silence requires solitude. Not the kind where you disappear to escape, but the kind where you disappear to prepare. This is the season of quiet sharpening. While others are broadcasting their next move, you're refining yours in complete darkness. And then you do something colder. You build a new image deliberately and not to impress. You build it to shift perception. You create ambiguity on purpose. Your style changes. Your posture tightens. You speak less, but when you do, people stop to listen. Not because you're louder, but because you've stopped explaining. You no longer try to prove your evolution. You embody it. You walk into rooms like you own nothing, and that makes people think you own everything. You make them fill in the blanks with their imagination. That's more powerful than anything you could say. That's control. And now you start shaping your external narrative. You don't post vulnerable quotes about rebuilding. You post sharp execution, not the process, just the result. No in my healing era captions. Just moves, finished projects, mastery shown in flashes. Because when people can't track how you got from pain to power, they get nervous. They wonder what else you've been hiding. That nervousness, that's your new presence. That's the weapon. It's Machiavellian stillness. It says, I know something you don't, and I don't need to share it. Then comes the hierarchy, reset. The people around you start to notice the shift. Some lean in, some pull back, some pretend nothing's changed, and that's your next data point. You observe with no reaction. Who shows support without needing attention? Who starts to joke about your silence, trying to pull you back into their comfort zone? Who starts talking about you in third person, as if the new version of you is a threat to the relationship you once had? These are all signs, not to be addressed, but to be noted. A strategist doesn't seek revenge. They reorganize the board. The loyal keep them near, but still at a safe angle. The disloyal, no punishment, just deletion, quiet erasure. No drama, no lecture, just absence. Now the focus narrows. You pick one weapon, just one, and you sharpen it until it could cut glass. That could be your logic, your writing, your ability to close deals, your insight into people's motives, your timing. Doesn't matter what the weapon is, it just matters that it becomes unignorable. Every strategist in history had one thing they did so well, it scared people. You don't need to become a polymath. You need to become undeniable in one lane. You do it not for praise, but for leverage. Because once you control something rare, you control access. And once you control access, you no longer chase respect, it's given automatically. But this mastery can't exist without internal stability. So now you build what Machiavelli would call emotional armor. This is your new defense system, invisible but indestructible. From now on, every emotion gets filtered. You no longer feel first and think later. That's the old you. Now the emotion arises and you observe it like smoke in a room. Anger, pause. Ask, will this help me here? Or is this bait, sadness? Ask, is this useful right now? Or is it trying to slow me down? Even joy, you question whether sharing it exposes future vulnerabilities. You become sovereign over your own internal weather. No more emotional forecasts written by other people. You also begin training for scenarios that haven't happened yet. You rehearse your reaction to betrayal, to public embarrassment, to losing again. Not because you expect it, but because you understand that not preparing is a choice. You ask yourself, how will I respond if this friend turns on me? What will I do if this opportunity implodes? How will I move if this room dismisses me again? This isn't paranoia. This is mental fortification. You're no longer surprised by attack. You're rehearsed. You've already bled in simulation, so when the cut comes, you don't flinch. And then ritualized command. You create behaviors not for productivity, but for power. You wake up at the same time, not for health, but to signal ownership. You speak more slowly, not for calmness, but to shift the room's rhythm. You pause longer before replying, not to seem mysterious, but to control the timing. These are not routines. They are micro-dominance rituals. They train your mind to associate structure with strength. Every action becomes a cue, I am in command now. And when you enter spaces, no rushed footsteps, no scanning for approval. You walk like a question they haven't prepared for, like a presence they didn't plan to feel. You become the disruption that doesn't apologize for arriving. You're no longer there to blend in, you're there to redefine the atmosphere. Machiavelli would say you must be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. But here's the secret, the strategist becomes both in silence. The cunning lives in your eyes. The roar, it's in your restraint. And just when the old you would have started seeking validation, the new you remembers there's one final move. Revenge through elevation. You don't clap back. You don't call out. You simply rise. So high, so suddenly that the people who once tried to diminish you can't even find the version of you they knew. Not even in memory. You don't rebuild to prove them wrong. You rebuild until they're irrelevant. You stop explaining. You start evolving. And the blade they once used against you, you turn it into a tool for carving a new empire. Now the game changes. You've done the internal stripping, the emotional recalibration, the weapon sharpening. What happens next is not just about moving forward, it's about positioning. The strategist understands that rising isn't enough. You have to rise into a position that cannot be displaced. This is where you stop thinking in terms of identity and start thinking in terms of utility. Who you are doesn't matter nearly as much as what you provide that no one else can. This is your value vector. One tight, undeniable thread of usefulness that holds under pressure, that pierces through bias, reputation, and even resistance. That thing could be insight, it could be presence, it could be clarity in chaos. But it must be real, and it must be needed. Machiavelli would say, a prince must learn how not to be good. And that includes learning how not to be attached to moral performance when your survival depends on clarity. It doesn't mean becoming ruthless just for sport. It means understanding that your transformation isn't about fairness, it's about becoming immovable. You don't become a cornerstone by being likable. You become it by being necessary, and necessity isn't determined by how people feel. It's determined by what they cannot do without. So you study the battlefield constantly, not just for trends, but for gaps, weak points. What skills are rising in value? What assumptions are being exploited? Where is attention flowing, and how can you redirect it? While others are chasing applause, you're designing gravity. But here's the rule. Machiavelli would scream into your ear if he were alive right now. Build leverage before loyalty. Most people get it backwards. They chase loyalty, first trying to build trust, connection, community, before they have anything that demands respect. But loyalty without leverage becomes charity. It becomes dependency. And worse, it's unstable. It shifts with moods, with opportunity, with perception. But leverage bends the disloyal back into orbit. So you focus now on creating something others need access to. You acquire knowledge, position, or capability that turns you into a gatekeeper. And suddenly, people who once underestimated you are forced to circle back, not because they want to, but because they have no choice. That's what being untouchable looks like. Not guarded behind walls, but embedded in something that can't be removed. Something that's integrated into the architecture of the system itself. And while they try to figure out how you got there, you're already on to the next layer of strategy. Information filtration. This is a mental upgrade that most people never install. The average person consumes for escape. You now consume for calibration. Every piece of data is filtered through one question. Can this enhance my leverage or sharpen my aim? If not, it doesn't enter. No mindless scrolling. No endless podcasts with no follow-up. No conversations that don't feed something. Your mind becomes a gated kingdom. If it doesn't feed the throne, it gets rejected at the door. And with that filtration comes the next necessary shift, controlled coldness. You're polite. You're pleasant. But you owe nothing. This isn't about being cruel. It's about being ungrabbable. Because now you understand, when people sense you're rebuilding, some will offer comfort, not to help you ascend, but to keep you manageable. Some comfort is just disguised containment. So you thank them, you nod, you walk away, you don't fight, you disappear. This isn't a Hollywood revenge scene. It's a Machiavellian one. The strategist walks away from every unnecessary entanglement. No confrontation needed. Just deletion by distance. And now, you train the next habit, rehearsed resilience. You simulate betrayal. Not out of paranoia, but preparation. You practice how you'll react to being laughed at, questioned, dismissed. You rehearse what you'll say or not say when a person tries to guilt you, gaslight you, or gossip about you. You run these drills mentally until they feel like muscle memory. So when the actual moment comes, you don't flinch. Because you've already lived it in silence. 10 times. 100 times. This is psychological armor. It's not built in the spotlight, it's built in the dark. From there, you construct routines that are no longer about efficiency, but about symbolism. Every repeated action becomes a subconscious reminder that you are in command. You wake up early, not to brag about hustle culture, but to reinforce dominance over your time. You move slower in conversation, not because you're unsure, but because you're controlling tempo. You stay silent when someone's fishing for your opinion, not because you're hiding, but because you're watching. Ritualized command. These aren't habits, they're rehearsals for the version of you that doesn't need external permission. And how you enter a room, that changes too. No more anxious scanning, no more adjusting your energy to fit the space. Now you arrive like the rule, not the exception. Machiavelli wrote that a lion terrifies wolves and a fox avoids the trap. You become both, not by acting, but by integrating. You read people before they speak. You predict outcomes before others even notice the pattern. Your presence speaks louder than your mouth ever could. And here's the key: your stillness makes people nervous. Your restraint makes them curious. That's where power hides not in volume, but in control. So, when the people who underestimated you see you again, they don't recognize the new version. That's intentional. You don't announce your comeback. You make your return so clean, so sharp, that by the time they realize it's you, they're too far behind to catch up. That's revenge not through confrontation, but through evolution. Not through rage, but through presence. You rise so high they can't reach you even if they stand on their past excuses and scream your name. But here's what matters most. You don't do any of this to prove them wrong. You do it to make them irrelevant. That's a different kind of win. And the reason it works is because of one final law burned into every strategist's brain: never interrupt your enemy while they're underestimating you. That's the fatal mistake most people make. They want credit mid-process. They want acknowledgement during transformation. But that makes the transformation vulnerable. When you're seen too early, you invite resistance. But when you sharpen in silence, no one sees the blade until it's at their throat. So now you don't explain. You don't post about your growth. You don't hint at the new you. You embody it, fully, quietly. The strategist doesn't ask for the spotlight. They build the stage under it, and when the lights shift and everyone looks over, they're already sitting in the throne. This is the phase that separates performers from architects. You've mastered detachment. You've rebuilt with silence. You've filtered out distractions and reprogrammed your emotional system. Now you're not just back, you're back differently. But you don't re-enter the world with noise. That's what amateurs do. They post declarations. They shout their change. They give away their strategy with premature celebration. Not you. You return with presence. Pure, calibrated presence. When you enter a room, now people feel it. They don't know what's changed, they just know something has. You don't smile as often. You don't rush to explain your boundaries. You're calm, but it's a strange calm. It unnerves the right people and empowers the ones who get it. That's no accident. That's by design. Machiavelli understood perception better than most modern therapists. He warned the moment you declare transformation, you invite resistance. So you don't declare. You don't argue for your evolution. You become so precise, so composed, that people are forced to adapt to your shift or be left behind. And that's what creates the magnetism, not just what you say, but what you now withhold. The illusion of openness becomes your next strategy. You're not closed off, you're just selectively clear. You reveal small victories to appear relatable, but never the mechanism. You let people see the shine, not the forge. And when they ask how you did it, you answer in riddles, not to confuse them, but to protect the system. Your speech becomes rare and specific, every sentence calibrated. You speak to install thoughts, not to express emotion. You praise when it creates momentum. You critique when it tests loyalty. You offer silence when attention is unearned. This is communication as engineering. The average person speaks to connect. The strategist speaks to configure, to shift rooms, to set temperatures, to trigger self-doubt in enemies and ignite ambition in allies. And in moments where talking would weaken your position, you say nothing. Silence becomes your scalpel. Then comes the realignment of relationships. This is the hardest part for most people because it demands absolute memory without revenge. During your fall, you took notes. You saw who disappeared when you broke, who whispered when you were absent, who offered support with strings. The amateur seeks retribution, the strategist repositions. Those who vanished don't get explanations, they get distance. The ones who mocked, not insults, just a complete lack of access. And the loyal, they get rewarded, but never so close that they forget how sharp your boundaries now are. Everyone is repurposed or removed. The strategist builds alliances like an emperor, with clear rankings, not emotional debt. And here's the subtle shift most won't notice: you no longer chase power. You become a center of gravity. You stop networking for clout and start building a frequency that draws the right players. Your silence makes people talk. Your restraint makes them curious. Your presence becomes a mirror. They either see their insecurities or their potential. Either way, they remember you. That's how true influence begins. Not by chasing attention, but by owning your energy so fully that others orbit you without knowing why. But the strategist knows that no position is permanent. So while others are enjoying the comeback, you're already preparing for the next battlefield. You don't rebuild into who you want to be. You rebuild into who the future will demand. You don't wait for disruption, you scan for it. What skills are becoming obsolete? What values are being redefined? What arenas are emerging that no one's ready for? You move before the shift. You build before the trend. While they're chasing the current, you're creating the current. Quietly, strategically. And here's where your most dangerous asset is born: the quiet obsession. Every strategist has one. Not a passion, not a hobby, but a secret refinement, a skill so buried, so developed in solitude that when it's finally revealed, it doesn't just surprise people, it overwhelms them. Maybe it's a deep understanding of human behavior. Maybe it's mastery of a system no one thought to study. Maybe it's the ability to see through noise, through people, through outcomes. You build it without announcing it, without journaling it, without hashtags. You build it like a weapon hidden beneath a calm exterior. Because when the moment comes, and it always comes, your quiet obsession becomes the lever that moves everything. Now, armor up. Not just mentally, emotionally. Because the world doesn't reward resilience quietly. The moment you rise, someone somewhere will try to pull you back to the old version of you. They won't call it sabotage. They'll call it just being honest, or checking in, or trying to keep you humble. Don't fall for it. Your response system must now operate like a firewall, not reactive, not defensive, but calibrated. When they provoke you, smile not out of kindness, but because you already saw this move coming. You redirect, you parry, you don't explain, you don't even acknowledge the trap. You let their words echo in their own emptiness. This isn't coldness. This is engineered poise. You are no longer fighting to prove yourself. You're using every confrontation as calibration. They mock your tone, you refine it sharper. They question your growth. You show results, not explanations. They try to bait you into reaction, and you give them stillness, so unnerving it becomes the real answer. Machiavelli knew this well. He said, "People don't remember what you said. They remember how powerless they felt in your presence." That's what you cultivate now, not dominance through intimidation, but through elegant indifference. You don't dismiss people. You outgrow them until they can't reach you. And here comes the final shift. You no longer think of rebuilding as a phase. You think of it as a cycle, a rhythm. The strategist understands reinvention is not a reaction to failure. It's a rhythm of power. You no longer wait to be broken before evolving. You evolve preemptively. You don't hold on to the new you like a trophy. You observe when it begins to age, and you move again. This is permanent refinement, permanent observation. Every room you enter is data. Every silence you hold is a probe. Every compliment received is filtered. Is this feedback or flattery? You are no longer the version that needed to be understood. You are now the version that cannot be ignored. Quiet, composed, clear, and with every step, every pause, every choice, you tilt the room slightly. People don't know why they respect you, but they do. They don't know why they hesitate before speaking around you, but they do. This is what it means to rebuild like a strategist, not to feel better, not to win arguments, but to make the entire world reconsider how they treat you without you saying a single word. You've entered a phase now where the world doesn't recognize you, and that's exactly the point. The strategist doesn't aim for familiarity. Familiarity makes people comfortable, and comfort breeds assumptions. You used to be predictable. You used to be legible. But now you've rewritten the code of your presence, and when people try to read you like they did before, nothing computes. That confusion, that hesitation. It's not a glitch, it's a feature. You've become unreadable by design, and now you embed the final principles, 5 unbreakable laws, the ones that will protect your rebuild from collapse and keep you evolving without slipping backward. Law 1. You never explain your pain publicly again. This is one of the most seductive traps, the idea that pain must be witnessed to be validated. But the strategist sees it differently. Pain is not performance, it's intelligence, it's insight, it's signal. You don't present your wounds for applause anymore. You convert them into patterns, into strategy, into leverage. People love a redemption arc, but they don't love you. They love the performance of your healing. That stops now. You don't owe them access to your scars. Not because you're hiding, but because those scars now carry blueprints only you get to read. Law 2. Your circle shrinks but becomes lethal. You no longer tolerate those who drain you with confusion disguised as love. You don't hand out proximity like candy to anyone who's nostalgic for the old you. From this point forward, your inner circle contains only 3 types: the sharp, those who challenge your mind, not your soul; the silent, those who respect your evolution without inserting their commentary; and the dangerous, those who move like you, clear, cold, precise. Everyone else is background noise. The strategist does not keep company for comfort. They keep it for expansion. If someone doesn't sharpen you, they are dulling you by default. Law 3. Every emotion is now observed before it is felt. This law is brutal, but it's freedom. The old you felt first reacted fast and rationalized later. That's why they got to you. That's why they cracked your system. Now the order flips. An emotion arises, and instead of being swept away, you study it. Anger, does this serve my position right now? Sadness, will expressing this earn respect or signal weakness? Even joy, will this celebration give someone else too much insight into my momentum? You don't suppress emotion. You survey it. You redirect it like a master conductor. Because now you don't have emotions. You use them. Law 4. You speak to shift dynamics, not to connect. This doesn't mean becoming cold or robotic. It means you've understood the weight of words. You don't talk just to be heard. You speak to install ideas, to reposition people, to rewire atmospheres. Every conversation is architecture now. You build frames, you plant questions, you don't vent, you don't overshare, you don't fill silence to ease awkwardness. You use it to create tension, productive, revealing tension. People used to hear you and feel comfortable. Now they hear you and think twice. That's evolution. Law 5. You never rebuild the same self twice. This is the law most people violate. They rebuild once and cling to it. They declare, this is the new me, and freeze. But freezing is fatal. The strategist never becomes static. They don't wait for the world to test them again. They test themselves first. They study the shift before it arrives. They change tone before tone becomes outdated. They shift posture before posture becomes predictable. And they never fall in love with their current form. Because the second you fall in love with your new identity, you begin defending it instead of refining it. From this point on, you don't just expect betrayal. You design for it, not as a pessimist, as a realist, because betrayal, like winter, always comes back around. and the strategist is never caught off guard. While others are surprised, you've already simulated the attack 1,000 times. They throw stones and find you armored. They call your name and find you absent. They try to bait you and find you laughing quietly, already out of reach. Now, let's bring it all back to you. The version of you that needed to be liked is gone. The one that begged for understanding, gone. The one that forgave too quickly, that over-explained, that gave people the benefit of the doubt when the doubt was already a sentence, gone. In its place stands something sharper, quieter, heavier. You now tilt the energy in a room not with volume, but with weight. You don't enter a room, you tilt it. Slightly, subtly. You don't force people to respect you. You make them unsure of the consequences of not respecting you. That's the strategist's trick. You remove approval from your needs list, and suddenly you control the entire transaction. And the people who knew the old you, let them wonder. Let them project. Let them write the version of you they're comfortable with in their minds. They'll never meet the real one again, because the real you doesn't speak to defend the change. The real you is the change embodied. This is what Machiavelli was really teaching. Not cruelty, not manipulation, but clarity. He understood that the world doesn't run on fairness. It runs on structure, on leverage, on silence, on timing. And now you do too. Because you've rebuilt, not just to feel stronger, but to never be broken the same way again. Not by people, not by systems, not by yourself. This is the new law of your existence. Rebuild in silence. Move with function. Speak with impact. Evolve before you're forced. And if anyone asks what changed, you just smile, because the truth is they'll never really know, and that's exactly how it should be.